Okay, people, welcome back. We're going to continue with chapter 4 from the book Ireland, Land of the Pharaohs, and it's called The Egyptian Connection. The Real Past is a book sealed with 7 seals. Dean W.R. Inge D.D. Having followed the Boyne Amon survivors on their exodus, and after many years wandering in the wilderness, we arrive at the centre of the landmass of the earth, Giza, in a country we now call Egypt. See illustration. John of Fordun says it was originally called Etheria, although Egyptian-born researcher Mustafa Gadala disputes this and claims it is a Greek word meaning them. It was here that they introduced their already developed culture. Ancient Egyptian civilization reached its apex, aesthetically, intellectually, and spiritually, in the dawn of the 18th dynasty and the arrival of the New World stage of the great initiate Amenhotep V, who later adopted the name Akhenaten in praise of the Aten sun disk. It meant Aten be praised, or Aten the satisfied. It is with Akhenaten this chapter of our story begins. Eli Waddell, probably the most underrated historian of his time, introduces us to the connections between Akhenaten's Egypt, Boyne, and the Scots-Irish. At this phase of their migrations they were called Egyptian-Israeli. The treasures of ancient high art lately unearthed at Luxor have excited the admiring interest of breathless world, and have awakened more vividly than before a sense of the vast antiquity of the so-called modern civilization, as it existed over 3,000 years ago in a far-off ancient Egypt and Syria Phoenicia. Keener and more personal interest, therefore, should naturally be felt by us in the long-lost history and civilization of our own ancestors in ancient Britain of about that period, as they are now disclosed to have been a branch of the same great ruling race to which belonged, as we shall see, the sun-worshipping Akhenaten, the predecessor and the father-in-law, more likely father, of Tutankhamun, and the authors of the naturalistic New Egyptian art, the Syro-Phoenicians. Ireland, Land of the Pharaohs map. So what have we got here? Because of his theoretical connection to our ancestors, we are required to introduce a brief historical biography of this intriguing individual of whom James Henry Breasted, 1865 to 1935, the father of American Egyptology, gave this eulogy. With the possible exception of Imhotep, Phoenician architect who introduced stone architecture and built the first stone masonry pyramidal tomb of the 13th century BC. Akhenaten was the first individual in history. Consciously and deliberately, by intellectual process, he gained his position and then placed himself squarely in the face of tradition and swept it aside. Breasted goes on to comment concerning the religion that Akhenaten established for his outer court, or the outer circle of his secret school. Such fundamental changes as these suggests that an overwhelming tide of inherited thought, custom, and tradition had been diverted from its channel by the young king who was guided to this revolution. It is only as this aspect of his movement is clearly discerned that we begin to appreciate the power of his remarkable personality. Before his time, religious documents were commonly attributed to ancient kings and wise men, and the power of a belief lay chiefly in its claim to remote antiquity and the sanctity of immemorial custom. He also indicates the inevitability for his downfall. He appeals to no myths, to no ancient and widely accepted versions of the dominion of the gods, to no customs sanctified by centuries. He appeals only to the present and visible evidences of his God's dominion, evidences open to all, and, as for tradition, wherever it left material manifestation of other gods and records which could be reached, he endeavoured to annihilate it. A policy so destructive was doomed to encounter fatal opposition. Akhenaten's determination to teach new ideas and his love of knowledge was also a trait of his ancient Aryan Phoenician ancestors and his own descendants, the Scots-Irish. In common with the antediluvian sages of Boyne, his teachings were far in advance of his time, in view of his fate, probably too far. It was during his reign, for the first time in recognised history, abstract concepts were used to explain about the fundamental nature of existence, or what the mystery schools called being. This was reflected aesthetically in his new city, Akhenaten, where, also for the first time in history, we see the emergence of conceptual art. Subtly, self-consciousness flourished in Akhenaten, albeit for a short time, like a meteor flashing across the ancient night sky. It was all too soon. Gone, even today. Akhenaten's teachings would be too progressive and complex for orthodox thought. Perhaps we should add too liberating. Distinguished Egyptologist Flinders Petrie said of his philosophy. If this were a new religion, invented to satisfy our modern scientific conceptions, we could not find a flaw in the correctness of its view of the energy of the solar system. How much Akhenaten understood we cannot say, but he had certainly bounded forward in his views and symbolism to a position which we cannot logically improve upon at the present day. No rag of superstition or of falsity can be found clinging to his new worship evolved out of the old Aten of Heliopolis, the sole lord or Aten of the universe. Akhenaten's mission was to communicate the ancient knowledge he had been taught in the Egyptian mystery schools to the uninitiated. Never again was knowledge to be for the exclusive benefit, as heretofore was the case, of the religious and political elite, but for every individual who had the capacity to understand it. Threaded throughout the history is a common understanding amongst researchers that all through history knowledge has been suppressed or destroyed. This gives us a raison d'etre for the existence of the mystery schools, specifically to protect and propagate knowledge. Unfortunately, Akhenaten's conceptual ideas did not translate into practical day-to-day improvements in living conditions for the lower classes, therefore not achieving all that he could have done. This may have been a reason why the then prevailing mindset of the underclasses did not enthusiastically accept his new ideas and still venerated the old gods. Akhenaten's radical reforms cost him his kingdom and, as with other great avatars acting as a vessel for the light of the love of God, on earth, his life. Where and when his life ended remains a mystery, because his resting place or mummified body has never been found. Coincidentally, it is still a mystery as to the whereabouts of the remains of Moses, the Israelite patriarch, who was contemporary with Akhenaten. Further research showed surprising links between these two great avatars. About this time in my researches, the existence of a strange poem surfaced. This happened during a discussion with a friend, a Rosicrucian student, about ancient Egypt. In the course of our conversation, she told me about a poem she had in her possession, apparently describing Moses' burial. What initially surprised me about her story was the connection of the poem to the Orange Order, since it was found among official papers belonging to her late grandfather, who had been the Order's Grand Treasurer in Ireland for 25 years. Unfortunately, it was lost, which was disappointing because it seemed to me that this poem could have been another link between the Orange Order and the Egypt-Israel tribes. But then, some time later, the friend rang to tell me she had been clearing out her mother's attic and found the poem. She kindly supplied me with the copy. The Burial of Moses. By Nebo's lonely mountain, on this side of Jordan's wave, in a vale in the land of Moab, there lies a lonely grave, and no man knows the sepulchre, and no man saw it ere. For the angels of God upturned the sod and laid the dead man there. That was the grandest funeral that ever passed on earth, but no man heard the trampling or saw the train go forth, noiselessly as the dark break steals back when night is done, and the crimson streak on ocean's cheek grows into the great sun. Noiselessly as the springtime her crown of verdure weaves, and all the trees and all the hills open their thousand leaves, so without the sound of music or voice of them that wept, silently down the mountains, crown the great procession swept. Perchance the bald eagle on grey Beth Peor's height. Out of his lonely eyrie looked on the wondrous sight. Perchance the lion stalking still shuns the hallowed spot, for beast and bird have seen and heard that which man knoweth not. But when the warrior dieth, his comrades in the war, with arms reversed and muffling drum, follow his funeral car. They show the banners taken, they tell of battles won, and after him lead his masterless stead, while peals the minute gun. Amid the noblest of land, we lay the sage to rest, and give the bard an honoured place with costly marble dressed, in the great minister's transept, where lights like glories fall, and the organ rings and the sweet choirs sing along the emblazoned wall. This was the truest warrior that ever buckled sword, and the most gifted poet that ever breathed a word. And never erst philosopher traced with his golden pen on a deathless page true so sage as he wrote down for men. And he had not high honour, the hillside for a pall, to lie in state while angels wait with stars for tapers tall, and the dark rock pines like tossing plumes over his bier to wave, and God's own hand in that lonely land to lay him in the grave, in that strange place without a name, whence his uncoffined clay shall break again, O wondrous thought, before the judgment day, and stand without glory wrapped around on the hills he never trod, and speak of the strife that won our life with the incarnate Son of God. O lonely grave in Moab's land, O dark Beth Peor's hill, speak to these curious hearts of ours, and teach them to be still. God has his mysteries of grace, ways that we cannot tell. He hides them deep, like the hidden sleep of him he loved so well. Author unknown. Some obvious contradictions cause me to suspect the author could not be describing the biblical Moses we are familiar with. It speaks, for instance, of a sage, a bard, and the most gifted poet that ever breathed a word. Hardly accurate descriptions of the biblical Moses. And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, I am slow of speech and of slow tongue. Exodus chapter 4:10. Another line in the poem says, he had not high honour, which could indicate a pharaoh, an epitaph that could only be attached to a king of Egypt. Akhenaten perhaps. Moses was never referred to as the incarnate Son of God, but Akhenaten was. Even he said of it himself. Conversely, Akhenaten was not generally known as a great warrior. Author Savitri Devi, who made a comprehensive study of his life, calls him the oldest prince of peace. Conversely, Moses was involved in numerous battles. Egyptologist Barbara Watterson disagrees, however, with Devi. She says that Akhenaten was not quite the pacifist that some of his admirers have claimed. She points out both he and, surprisingly, Nefertiti are shown on the pylon gateways of temples in the traditional pose of smiting the enemy. To complicate matters further, Ralph Ellis argues that Aaron, Moses' brother, was Akhenaten. On returning to the biblical story of Moses, it can be seen that they are not at odds with the theory of Aaron being a pharaoh. Aaron and Moses could have easily conversed with the pharaoh, for their father was a pharaoh. When Aaron, Akhenaten, or his father did something wrong, the name Aaron was deleted and Pharaoh was inserted. Lawrence Gardner enters the debate to claim that Aaron and Moses were both pharaohs. However, he too declares that Akhenaten was Moses, so was his brother Aaron. Gardner explains it this way. Correctly stated, this pharaoh's name Aaron was Smenkhkara, vigorous as the soul of Ra. Alternatively, since Ra was the sun god of the Heliopolis, house of light, called On, Pharaoh Smenkhkara was also Smenkhkara On, from the phonetic ending of which derives the name Aaron. Established history says that Smenkhkara was Akhenaten's successor because Tutankhaten was too young to assume the throne. Consequently, Smenkhkara ruled in his stead. An alternative theory goes that Smenkhkara was a throne name for Nefertiti. Given that we, emulating the Egyptian Israeli tribes, are just passing through Egypt, our journey does not really require we ensnare ourselves in the minutiae of this debate. However, because some readers may be interested and because the obvious contradictions as to Akhenaten's fate and identity when he disappears from the historical stage, as well as his connections with the Israeli tribes, we will take another look at this theory before we leave. Could this orange poem be a clue to his undiscovered final resting place, or just the musings of an anonymous poetic orangeman who was simply a biblical student? Is it recorded in Deuteronomy that Moses did ascend the mountain of Nebo to die, and was buried in the land of Moab? And Moses went up from the plains of Moab unto the mountain of Nebo a few verses later. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, and he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor. But no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. In passing, it might be worthwhile noting another intriguing snippet of a poem from the same source. Maybe we can discover any hidden meanings before we finish our inquiries. When Moses from Mount Horeb came to meet his brethren on the plain, they asked him where and from whence he came. He answered them in Hebrew. According to Conor McDerry in his book Irish Wisdom, Hebrew was jargon for Irish. An obvious piece of the puzzle, and one we nearly overlooked, raises the question, what has all this to do with the Orange Order in latter-day Ireland? Although we have already touched on the contentious idea about the connection between the Orange Order and the tribes of Israel, the details of this will be developed as our story continues. For now, we will just say that the history of Israeli tribes is an essential part of the Orange Order's imagery and heritage, as well as being integral to the chronology of ancient Ireland. Akhenaten's reign lasted about 25 years, 1375 to 1350 BCE, if we accept the modern mystery school dates. Most established thought, however, state that he ruled for 17 years. Perhaps this inconsistency could be reconciled by comparing what happened to King James II, who lost his throne but not his title in the eyes of the Jacobite supporters. Akhenaten also lost his throne in his 17th year but not his title of Pharaoh. There is also the other possibility, which includes the time of his joint reign with his father, Amon III. In those 25 years of his reign, the first great individual was to change the world forever. The manipulative, infected minds of the priestly elite representing the old control and order tried to erase his memory and his sacrilegious teachings for eternity, and in large measure they succeeded. For 3,000 years little was known about him or his philosophy, even though much of it resonated with early Christian thought. However, it was because of the empathy Christian archaeologists found with his teachings which eventually helped to revive his memory. How his transition came about is still not clear. It is not known if he was murdered or died a natural death. The archives of the Rosicrucian order have this to say on the matter. The untimely departure of beloved past master Amenhotep V, Akhenaten, whose transition occurred on July 24th, 1350 BC, based on the current calendar. On the memorial day of his transition he forsook all earthly things and found joy in the holy sanctum, adjoining his bedchamber in his palace. Here in the midst of meditation he was inspired to invoke the law of raising both his hands in meditation too. He pronounced the lost word. Then, as peace and quiet came to his hungry soul, he knelt in prayer. In this position, he finally vowed his obligations to God and to all his fellow men who preceded him for the knowledge they had given to the world, and then raised both arms to the cosmic that might reach down and raise him to the heights sublime. According to esoteric tradition, the world then plunged into a dark age from which, with the possible exception of the Greek Golden Age, it was never fully recovered. It was also about this time the Egyptian mystery schools withdrew from public phase of their work, as has happened periodically ever since. At these times they only reveal their ancient wisdom secretly to those qualified morally and intellectually. This could be interpreted in a religious sense as the dark night of the soul, or in secular terms as dark ages. There were other reasons for this withdrawal from outer activity, but the major one was to preserve and protect the sacred knowledge from the prevailing dark force. Another very important reason this was done was to prevent the masters of wisdom being turned into gods and devotees forming a religion in their name. As we know, and history proves, this has never been beneficial to humanity. mystery schools records stress that Jesus' mission was supposed to be secret. An example of this is found in Matthew 13 verse 11, when he responds to a question from his disciples. He answers and said unto him, Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. The dark night can be clearly seen repeating itself in later history after the torture and execution of the Christ, Jesus. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was darkness all over the earth until the 9th hour, and the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the mists. According to Amon, the dark night ascended fully upon civilization once again in 1314, when Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Order of the Temple, was burned at the stake in Paris. Interestingly, Masonic authors Knight and Lomas surmise that it is de Molay's image and not that of Jesus that appears on the Turin shroud. Even though the teaching of the ancient wisdom was well established in the early days of the 18th dynasty in Egypt, its structure was primitive, having no formal schools or scrutiny as to the worthiness of candidates, which made it easy for the Amon priesthood to infiltrate and turn the teachings to their own advantage. Rival factions spouted and were known by a variety of names depending on the communal god. In Heliopolis the god was Ra, the sun god. In Thebes it was Amun, meaning the hidden one, and in Memphis, Ptah, the great architect of the universe. Thutmose III, 1504 to 1450 BCE, united the rival factions into one organization to give birth to the Egyptian mystery schools as we know them now. It was only then they began to export their teachings into other countries. When they did this, they assumed different names in different parts of the world, in accordance with the language of each country and the peculiarities of the general religious or spiritual though of the people. This knowledge will be important to us when we trace the White Brotherhood's return journey to their ancestral homeland. No matter what label they used in public, they always preserved the memory and teachings of the great master Akhenaten. It is recorded in ancient texts he was a graduate of the great University of Heliopolis, known in the Bible as On, from where, traditionally, the Rosicrucians emerged. There is reason to believe the young Prince Amenhotep V may have spent some time as a student at Heliopolis in the north, the great centre of the sun god Ra. In such event, he would have been indoctrinated in centuries-old teachings of that priesthood. So it was with that other great anti-establishment, anti-authority, Arian teacher, Jesus, 1300 years later. Jesus, Arian, esoteric literature reveals that he was born of Gentile parents through whose veins flowed Aryan blood. From the same source we gain knowledge of Jesus' travels to India, Tibet, Assyria and Greece before returning to Egypt to begin his studies. When Jesus was ready for his entrance into the supreme college and monastery of the Brotherhood at Heliopolis, the records show that he was surrounded, as we have stated, with every comfort and convenience, and that for his study he was given many of the rarest manuscripts containing the texts of ancient doctrines and creeds. To fully understand Akhenaten's teachings, there is no dichotomy between Egyptian mystery school teaching and Akhenaten's teachings without years of graded study may not be realistic. We will nonetheless attempt to understand as much as we can by choosing discerningly from the plethora of mundane and esoteric evidence available, which can be safely presented in the public domain. Most of the mundane evidence we presently have of his teachings was inscribed on the tombs of the nobles, such tombs being called eternal houses, in the city that he built, which he named Akhenaten, meaning the horizon of the Aten. The conspiracy-minded speculate that Washington DC was modelled on Akhenaten, and possibly it was. It is now the village of El Amarna, situated near the bend of the Nile, Bru na Nile. See illustration, page 127. Barbara Watterson, in her delightfully illustrated book, Amarna, confirms Amork's claim. The fullest statement of Akhenaten's faith is found in a beautiful hymn carved on the west wall of A's Tub at Akhenaten. A was Akhenaten's father-in-law and Nefertiti's father. Interestingly, he was also Akhenaten's uncle, his mother's brother. the implication being, as we would understand today, that Akhenaten married his full cousin in the same way that William, Prince of Orange, was to marry his full cousin, that is his mother's brother's daughter. Nefertiti was reputed to be a Mitanni princess of a northern Indo-European race, a queen in her own right and a joint ruler with Akhenaten. Cairo-born linguist Ahmed Osman lends his support to this theory. It has been suggested that because of her name, which can be translated as the beautiful one who has come, Watterson gives my favourite interpretation of her name, the beautiful woman is present. Nefertiti may have been the Mitannian princess Tadu Kehipa. Osman also relates an anecdote regarding the relationship which sounds eerily familiar. In order to ensure her son's ultimate inheritance of the throne, note, Osman is referring to Akhenaten's mother, Tai, who he claims was of mixed Egyptian-Israeli blood. She therefore arranged for him to marry his half-sister, Nefertiti, the daughter of Amenhotep III, by his sister Satamun, the legitimate heiress, and to be appointed his father's corregent, with special emphasis on Nefertiti's role in order to placate the priests and nobles. This episode is echoed to a degree in the relationship between Mary, William, and the priests and the nobles of England. We discovered earlier it was Mary, not William, who was a legitimate heir, and furthermore it was William's mother who manipulated their marriage. Just another series of coincidences. Akhenaten and Nefertiti had 6 daughters from their union. The one of interest to our story is Meritaten. There was also a son, although from a different mother, but it was tradition that the image of a male heir is not shown. This male sibling was Tutankhamun. Watterson says of him, however, the name of Tutankhaten was found in an inscription on a block of stone that had been reused at Khemenu, but probably originated from the wall of a temple in Akhenaten. The inscription reads, the son of the king, of his own body, his beloved Tutankhaten, but not by Nefertiti. Today the favourite candidate for the mother of his particular prince is Queen Kia. Tutankhamun, it is believed, was murder, which effectively brought to an end the golden age of this mysterious 18th dynasty. However, the dynasty officially ended following the reign of Pharaohs Ai and Horemheb. The ending of this dynasty set the stage for later priest-ridden de facto civilizations. Again, history draws parallels with the House of Stuart in ancient Egypt. After James was defeated at the Battle of the Boyne, the House of Stuart effectively ended, although there were 2 more female scions, Mary and Anne, before that officially occurred. We find evidence for this idea from a novel source, the lullaby Rockabye Baby. This nursery rhyme relates to the fall of the House of Stuart. Rockabye baby in the tree top, when the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. Down will come baby, cradle and all. The wind in the verse is interpreted as a Protestant wind that brought William to England in 1688. The reference to the tree and bough obviously signify the Stuart House family tree, and the child in the fallen cradle is James, baby's son. The breaking bough represents the collapse of the House of Stuart. Conversely, a Williamite ballad counters with an ode that argues that Stuart's house would prosper under Mary. Here musing on these banks, the mind looks back in wonder, and visions rise of hostile ranks, impatient kept asunder. From every land a warrior band, for Europe owns the quarrel. His hand shall clench no barren branch that snatches this day's laurel. Returning to our brief synopsis of Egyptian history, we discover that Nefertiti's importance is recorded on one of the boundaries steles at Akhenaten. Queen Nefertiti, like her mother-in-law Queen Tai, enjoyed a prominence that had not existed in the past. On one of his new city's boundaries stelae, her husband had her described flatteringly as fair of face, joyous, and a double plume, mistress of happiness, endowed with favour, at hearing whose voices one rejoices, lady of grace, great love, whose disposition cheers the lords of the 2 lands. Nefertiti is depicted as having equal stature with the king, and their names are enclosed in a cartouche. It has been implied she was Indo-European, Aryan by race, as was her husband, who was also part Israeli. Ahmed Osman reveals he lived with the Israeli tribes in Goshen for an unspecified number of years. Their marriage seems to have been idyllic. The ancient archives show, however, that it was not always harmonious. About the 16th year of Akhenaten's reign, political unrest reached into the sacred city. It would appear that his wife, the beautiful Nefertiti, did not fully agree with his complete disregard for the political affairs of the empire. She had been his faithful companion and stood staunchly by him in his rebellion against the Amon priesthood. His affection for her was evident in numerous portraits and monuments. It would appear that this disagreement resulted in a disturbance of the domestic tranquility. Nefertiti took up residence in the north end of the city, taking with her young Tutankhaten, who later became Tutankhamen. Despite their martial problems, they carried on their mission, which was to perpetuate and protect the ancient teachings. The teachings always manifest as a solar religion to the outer circle, for the benefit of all humanity. Dionysius of Caesarea said of this race of Aryan Celtic Phoenician sun worshippers, "They were the first great founders of the world, founders of cities, of mighty states, who showed a path through seas before unknown. In the first ages, when sons of men knew not which way to turn them, they assigned to each his first department they bestowed, of land a portion, and of sea a lot, and sent each wandering tribe far off to share a different soil and climate. Hence arose the great diversity so plainly seen, mid nations widely severed." Akhenaten's great intellect and compassion for all manifestations of life shines out from the inspiring hymns he composed to the god of his heart, represented by Aten's disc. The following two hymns of praise are typical examples of his tribute to this one living and soul reality. Centuries later, some of these hymns found their way into Hebrew Psalms and into the present-day Christian Bible. "Thou dawnest beautifully in the horizon of the sky, O living Aten, thou wast the beginnings of life. When thou didst rise in the eastern horizon, thou didst fill every land with thy beauty. Thou art beautiful, great, glittering high over every land. Thou rays they encompass the lands even to the end of all thou hast made. Thou art Ra, and thou penetratest to the every end of them. Thou blindest them for thy beloved son, the Pharaoh. Though thou art far away, those rays are upon the earth. Though thou art in the faces of men, though footsteps are unseen. Though rise gloriously, O thou living Aten, Lord of eternity. Thou art radiant, beautiful and strong. Thy love is mighty and great. Thy light of divers colours leadeth all faces captive. Thou fillest the two lands with thy love, O thou self-created God, maker of every land and whatsoever there is upon it, men and cattle, beast of every sort, and trees of every kind that grows. Thou art the mother and father of all that thou hast made. Their eyes, when thou risest, turn and graze upon thee, their hearts beat high at the sight of thee, for thou risest as their Lord. Their hands are lifted up in adoration of thy person. Thou quickest hearts with thy beneficent acts which are life. Thou sendest forth thy beams all the creatures. Thou hast made leap forward thee, and there is jubilee in every land. Thy honoured son rejoiceth, his heart is glad, O thou living Aten, who appearest in heaven. I am thy son, satisfying thee and exalting thy name. Thy strength and thy power established in my heart. Eternity is thine emanations. Thou thyself art alone, but there are millions of powers of life in thee to make thy creatures live. Bud burst into flower, the plants that grow on wastelands send up shoots at thy rising. Compare this sample from one of Akhenaten's hymns. How manifold are thy works, they are hidden before men, O soul God, beside whom there is no other. Thou didst create the earth according to thy heart. With Psalm 104, O Lord, how manifold are thy works, and wisdom hast thou made them all. Thy earth is full of thy riches. Interestingly, mythologist and historian Gerald Massey says, in addition to the 5 books, the Jews assign 11 of the Psalms to Moses. To explore the mind behind these hymns is to detect the first rays of self-consciousness. Composing his hymns, he writes, "It was known in my heart, revealed to my face. I understood, obviously." He possessed an introspective consciousness which was probably unique in his time. His religion was utterly different to anything that has occurred before, certainly as far as the ordinary Egyptian was concerned. They never considered, and probably didn't even have a concept of, any other race being their equals, or their gods having anything to do with any other country or race. Akhenaten changed this by internationalizing his religion. In his hymns he includes all men and all races as a manifestation of the one sole God. He makes this patently obvious in the above hymn when he sings, "Thou fillest the 2 lands with thy love, O thou self-create God, maker of every land and whatsoever there is upon it, men and cattle, beasts of every sort and trees of every kind that grow." It is evident from this verse, along with Akhenaten believed that all living beings came from the one self-created source, the one true reality, and therefore everything had to be interrelated. He was the first man in recorded history to publicly assume this designation, Son of God, when he wrote, "No one knowest thee save I thy Son." In Egypt, or elsewhere in the world at the time, the religion he promoted must have been too much for established thought, not least for the politico-religious ruling class. It was he who began a very strenuous attack upon the heathen Amon priesthood of Egypt, which had held the mind of the masses in slavery, and it was he who established the world's first monotheistic religion, for Akhenaten declared that there was not many gods but only one, the ever-living sole God. As is the case today, it was the status quo, the parasitical system, the Amon priesthood was protecting, but within the context of their own time and their contemporary mindset. Who can condemn them? The high priests of our present society do not have the luxury of this excuse. The inheritors of the Amon priesthood's legacy, especially in Europe, where a deliberate attempt is being made to bring the population back to the bicameral mindset under the auspices of a new Holy Roman Empire, better known as the EU. Unsurprisingly, because his teachings were coming from a burgeoning introspective mind, the vast majority of the Egyptian population, still in bicameral mode, had trouble understanding them. In fact, because of the diametrically different mindsets, consciousness versus bicameral, it may well have been impossible, but he did help to create the space for future generations of budding conscious minds to expand into. This lesson was built on when Jesus, in later history, used parables to transmit his teachings to a transitory bicameral world that was struggling to come to terms with their conscious mind. Even today, minds infected by corrupted bicameral tendencies, demonstrated in politics and religion, would have trouble understanding Akhenaten's teachings, and those that did not want them to be made known because it would expose their machinations and inadequacies. That he knew the true nature of the politics of the time and did not have much time for it is recorded in the arcane records. Young Amenhotep the 4th or 5th, I'm not sure what that is, Akhenaten, even so co-regent with his father, showed disinclination towards conquest and political affairs. The mystical aspects of his personality asserted themselves at an early age. Another source that will give us more insights into his reign is the Amarna letters. These were communications between Akhenaten and his vassals that make it strikingly clear he had logical and reasoning mind, not easily manipulated by the Amon priesthood. Despite pleas from his vassals for help in their local land disputes, Akhenaten refuses to intervene, in keeping with his attitude to unnecessary violence. A footnote added to one of the letters shows an advisor's concerns on the state of the kingdom. "Bring aloud before my lord the king the words, the whole territory of my lord the king is going to ruin." Many Egyptologists have criticized him for such actions because they conclude he had weakened the kingdom with his policies, and they probably did, as King James did. Nevertheless, he was remaining true to the laws and principles of nature, the God of his heart, because he knew that in the long term this was the only way the human race was going to evolve and survive. Though he was apparently neglecting the political duties of his office because of that idealism which he was nurturing, he was actually beginning a great service for all mankind, particularly for its spiritual future. So-called experts, who have not fully understood the genius they were attacking, still criticize him and his philosophy. The doyen of 20th century Egyptologist Sir Alan Gardner, 1879 to 1963, thought him a fanatic. The archaeologist John Pendlebury considered him a religious manic, and in the opinion of another Egyptologist, S.R.K. Glanville, 1900 to 1956, Akhenaten, as a king, was deserving of nothing but censure. Little is known about the early life of Akhenaten. It is recorded he had a brother called Thutmose, who died at an early age. His father was Amenhotep III, Egypt's sun king, who also had the distinction of being called the Great Builder. The Great Luxor Temple, which may still be seen in Egypt today, is often attributed to Amenhotep III. He became known, even in antiquity, as one of the sages of Egypt. His sayings were quoted for centuries by later people who had even forgotten him as an individual. His grandfather was Thutmose the fifth, and both are traditionally recognized as being in the vanguard of establishing the Egyptian mystery schools that acted as both universities and monasteries. It is believed Thutmose III, Akhenaten's great-great-grandfather, was the founder of the Egyptian mystery schools where, traditionally, the Rosicrucian order draws its pedigree. Akhenaten's mother was Tai. Her parents were Yawa. Osman proposes this was the patriarch Joseph, and Thuya. Rosicrucian records reveal Tai was a descendant of the Atlantean tribes that came into Egypt. These tribes are later documented in the Bible as the Israelites, some of whom our story identifies as the Scots-Irish. What was certain about Akhenaten's mission was his attempt to rescue his people from their priest-ridden oblivion and guide them into the light of consciousness. His methodology included teaching about the one reality or the one universal God, a God not just for Egypt but a God for the whole world, as symbolized by the sun disk he called Aten. Akhenaten knew the importance of the sun to all life on earth, as did the architects, astronomers of Newgrange, in whose minds these teachings were nurtured. In common with the Boyne sages, he did not worship the sun as a deity. This is a misconception, perhaps because of his predecessors, who may not have understood the sublime laws of the cosmos as completely as he did, misguidedly worshipped the symbol itself. This was probably one of the reasons he left Thebes, the home of the Amon priesthood, to build his own city called Akhenaten, to the glory of the one ever-living God. It was described in glowing terms as great in loveliness, rich in possessions. At the sight of her beauty there is rejoicing. She is lovely and beautiful. However, even if he had worshipped the sun, Sol, acronym for source of life, it does after all provide the very essence of life. Without it there would be nothing. Is this not more rational than the supernaturalism of most religions today? Nevertheless, he believed there was an immortal power behind the sun, which is the source of all life. His worship of this power behind the sun, a faceless god, originated and was carried into Egypt from northern climes with the Atlantean tribes and carried out from it by the Egyptian Israeli tribes. Savitri Devi emphasizes the fact that he did not worship the actual sun, but through the visible disk of the sun Aten, he worshipped the energy within the disk, the ultimate reality which men of all creeds still seek, knowingly or unknowingly, under 1,000 names and through 1,000 paths. Akhenaten believed the sun was to the earth what he conceived as God, the greater light was to the universe, and it was this that Akhenaten was referring to as the unmanifested energy behind the sun. This teaching of the energy within the disk echoes the Druidic teachings of the ancient Britons, Nid, Dew, and Dim. What does not matter is God. We also find the concept of an unknowable God being affirmed by the Israeli prophet Isaiah. To whom then will ye liken God? Or what likeness will ye compare unto him? Have ye not known? Have ye not heard? Hath it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth. Boyne compared the Isaiah statement with the Druidic solar teaching. In that conception, the canon thought that the temple was erected to represent the shadow, El Shaddai, of divinity. This circle was called the Circle of Neph, one of the many epithets borne by Hermes, and whose followers, the astronomers or seers, were called Nephilim or Knephilim. It was in effect the solar ecliptic, the sacred circle in which was wrapped up the Hermetic doctrine of the zodiac or circle of the months, weeks and days. He who sat upon that circle, the ecliptic, was and is the sun. Here is the explanation of the reason why the Druids erected round temples and worshipped the sun. If you like to explore this heretic Pharaoh's life further, Saviti Devi's book, Son of the Sun, is probably one of the best biographies of this individual. Although the Rosicrucians consider Akhenaten as a traditional first Grand Master, the original guardians of the sacred knowledge are lost in the mists of time. However, they can be rediscovered by exploring the prehistory of Ireland. The key is found in understanding the symbolism revealed at the Battle of the Boyne. To conclude this part of the introduction of the life of Akhenaten, this brilliantly concise description of Akhenaten from a modern initiate is well worth including. Akhenaten, the apocalyptic pharaoh of Egypt from 1379 to 1362 BC, was first known individual and perhaps the first conscious rather than bicameral person. He was the first known luminary who thought and acted independently of tradition. He radically broke major government, military, religious traditions entrenched for over 1,000 years. He abandoned the religious capital of Thebes, today the city of Luxor. He replaced military campaigns of plundering in favour of profitable trade. He replaced concrete polytheism and its idolatry with abstract monotheism. His rule was minimalist. After his death, however, the political establishment murdered his only son, the boy king Tutankhamun, and promptly returned Egypt to its former government, military, religious status quo. Right, Moses and Akhenaten. So guys, I'm going to end this part of the chapter here at Moses and Akhenaten, and hopefully I can make this into 2 parts rather than 3. But that will be that for tonight, people. Thanks for joining me, and I will see you in my next reading. And by the way, I'd like to give a big thanks to Sophia, who's been supporting my channel recently and sending me lots of really good information. She's possibly going to be a future guest. She has some great theories that are related to these books that I'm reading and my research as well, so it'll be interesting to hear a different point of view from another person live. Anyway, people, have a good week, and I'll see you all later. Cheers.